Lisette van Doorn, you are CEO Europe at the Urban Land Institute. Thank you for joining us on BiTV.
Thank you for the invitation.
ULI, alongside the European Association for Investors in Non-Listed Real Estate Vehicles, INREV, and the Principles for Responsible Investment, PRI, recently presented a new study entitled, and I quote, Mapping ESG, a landscape review of certifications, reporting frameworks, and practices, which was carried out by PwC with the support of a range of experts from leading real estate fund managers and investors. What was the goal of this new study?
That's a very good question. And to be honest, we already started working on this almost 2 years ago. And with the range of standards, certifications, and more recently regulations rapidly increasing and being all very different, country level, city level, we thought it would be very helpful if we can provide transparency by mapping each of the standards, and then hopefully say, well, maybe these overlap and you don't need to use that anymore. Obviously, in a world where regulation gets more important, you might then hope that regulation takes over some of the pre-imposed standards by the industry themselves, which we started with. So that was the original purpose we hoped to be able to achieve.
And following this comprehensive research, the study presents an extensive mapping of the different ESG requirements for real estate professionals, which, as you said, are only growing, as we are faced with an even more urgent response to climate change. What picture emerges from this exercise of mapping the ESG requirements?
Well, that it's not so easy to just eliminate some. And what we really found is that the purpose and the contribution each of these different standards have is very different. What we have seen is the evolution in the industry. Obviously, when the industry started to focus on sustainability about 20 years ago, it was all focused on the building level. And we started with certifications, and those certifications were extremely helpful to push the industry forward. And soon were kind of viewed equally to a green building, where we've seen the industry moving, partly because of reporting standards that have been introduced, like INREV, PRI, EPRA, depending on whether a company, it's a listed company or a real estate fund or whatever. And then more recently, under the pressure of decarbonization and reducing the emissions, the focus has gone from what is a building capable of through its construction, the insulation, the solar panels on the roof, to what is the actual environmental performance of the building. So you see the role of certifications, for example, changing a lot. You cannot interpret that anymore, and even more and more are shifting to actual performance anymore, but that's not to be said that's a green building. The definition actually doesn't exist. So there's the required framework with more and more regulations. There's then the industry standards, and what we see with regulation is that often they're not tailored to real estate. And that's complicated because real estate is a very specific asset class. So, and we've seen that before also with AI FMD when it was introduced, makes it hard for real estate. As FDR, for example, the EU related to the EU taxonomy is an example of that, where if you want to reach the highest level, the Article 9, that only applies to all the buildings that are already green. So that would encourage new construction versus the brown to green transition, which actually should be the essence of the focus of the industry towards decarbonization. So what we see is that it's very important for the manager or the investor to look at what am I trying to achieve? What do I need to adhere to? Which countries do I operate? What do my investors want from me? But what this really does is it makes it easier to have the conversation and to make the choices, saying, listen, this is what you ask from me, but we are choosing this standard because we feel it fits us better because of the investment strategy, how ambitious we want to be on ESG, and to help the industry, because obviously the knowledge level within the industry is hugely, there's a huge gap in that, that we can help the whole industry, the bigger companies who may already be very advanced on the topic, but it helps them in the conversations with investors too. And for the smaller, maybe less educated ones or just starting in this field, we have included a set of what we've called self-assessment questions to kind of, if you go through, it's not a flowchart that ends up with one standard when you've answered all the questions, but it does help you to say, okay, if I would do this, then that's relevant for me, and that is not so relevant. And we sincerely hope that's of interest to the industry.
Yeah, because as you say, sometimes it's difficult for real estate professionals to that understand the problem to find the right solution for their models in an ocean, shall I say, of propositions and of sometimes contradictory requirements. Maybe for real estate professionals listening to us that maybe feel a little bit lost in this process, what do you see maybe as the main priorities to take away from the study, and maybe that they can implement in their approach to the ESG transition?
Well, it's first of all, I would say read the report, because I hope that already gives a very good overview. Some people said you could view it almost as a handbook, required reading for the ESG expert. And then I would really encourage people to say, this should be part of your corporate strategy. So ESG strategy is not something on the side. It should be very linked to how do you want to be a front runner in the field of ESG? Do you feel the mainstream is good enough? Also look at the resources available, because what we learned is that it is very, very intense to respond to everything. And some of the feedback we got from some of the players also when we launched it was many actually started with GRASP some years ago, as it felt pretty comprehensive to get started. It's not an overly high burden, but it can be very helpful. And then kind of take it step by step. And then with those self-assessments questions, hopefully it helps guide what is relevant, what to do, where to start, and then proceed from then on. And I think also not to be afraid with having the conversations with investors, because that's also some of the feedback we got is before, because there was no mapping, there was no navigation. It was extremely hard to say to an investor, no, I'm not answering your questions because actually I've already done this here. Everything was just slightly different. This really helps to say, well, this is what we focus on. You actually asked the same thing. It's already covered here. So in that sense, it makes the conversation more transparent.
Thank you. That's sadly all the time we have. I'm guessing we're gonna speak a lot about those questions of ESG transition going forward. A lot of work in front of us. So thank you for letting us see maybe a better path towards on the way. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time. Thank you also everyone for taking the time with us today on BiTV. We'll see you soon on BiTV.